What would happen if a knight dropped his sword and ran, or if a foot soldier froze in terror as the enemy charged? In the brutal world of medieval warfare, fear wasn't just dangerous, it was contagious. And armies knew it. Cowardice could break a formation, collapse a siege, or lose a war. That's why medieval commanders didn't just fight enemies, they fought fear within their own ranks. So how did they do it? What did punishment look like? And was there ever room for mercy? From public humiliation to battlefield executions, and even spiritual shame imposed by the church, the response to fear was calculated, harsh, and deeply rooted in honor. Today, we're uncovering the real methods medieval armies used to deal with cowardice, and why running from battle was often more dangerous than staying to fight. Number 1. Cowardice was a serious crime. Archaeologists in Gausk have recently uncovered the remarkably well-preserved tomb of a medieval knight beneath what used to be a popular ice cream parlor, revealing unexpected new insights into medieval honor culture. The limestone tombstone, carved with a knight in chainmail clutching shield and sword, dates to the 13th or 14th century and suggests that elite warriors held immense social weight. Knightly reputation hinged on unwavering courage in battle. In contrast, mass grave remains from Lebanon's Crusader Wars tell a darker story. Skeletal injuries to the backs of soldiers indicate they were struck while fleeing or executed after retreating, vividly illustrating the brutal consequences of cowardice in medieval warfare. Meanwhile, recent scholarly work has reconsidered tactics with fear as a constant presence. Historians emphasize that commanders designed deployments anticipating fear and desertion, understanding that panic by one could cascade into chaos. They deliberately drilled formations and group cohesion to suppress natural fight or flight responses and reinforce collective discipline, treating cowardice not only as a moral failing but an operational threat, and the shame associated with fleeing loomed larger than physical wounds, especially for knights whose identities revolved around personal honor and fealty. In England, studies of chivalric culture confirmed that the stigma of cowardice outweighed even death itself. Knights were indoctrinated with ideals insisting shame from retreat would haunt them more than a fatal wound. This pressure pushed many to stand their ground at all costs, fueling legendary charges, but also countless tragedies where fear and honor collided. Even teenage nobles, like the Black Prince at Crecy, embodied this ethos, expected to hold lines in the face of overwhelming odds, knowing that retreat meant disgrace. Returning to the Gdańsk discovery, a preliminary isotopic analysis suggests that the knight may have belonged to regional dynastic orders, perhaps a Teutonic or local ruling house. The absence of grave goods and the simplicity of burial emphasize that symbolic gestures and reputations mattered more than material wealth. This knight likely lived and died within a society where failure in battle meant ruin not only for him, but for his lineage. Sadly, the remains found in Sidon tell a harsher truth. Many crusaders died with wounds to the back of the neck and torso, betrayed by either retreat or execution after defeat. These physical scars reflect cultural enforcement, fierce group discipline where fleeing invited deadly consequences from enemies or allies alike. Taken together, these recent discoveries, tomb inscriptions, mass graves, battlefield trauma, underscore that medieval armies did more than fight fear, they ritualized and punished it. Cowardice was not merely a lapse in nerve, but a criminal breach of trust, an offense that unraveled the social fabric of knights, soldiers, and their lords. The Iron Code of medieval warfare demanded courage not just in deed, but in collective belief. Number 2, punishments were brutal and public. In the harsh reality of medieval life, fear wasn't just a side effect of war, it was used as a weapon by commanders, kings, and even priests to control behavior and reinforce discipline. When a soldier or knight failed to meet expectations in battle, especially through cowardice or desertion, the response wasn't hidden or discreet. Punishment had to be seen, heard, and remembered. Across towns and camps, acts of public shaming were carefully staged to leave a deep impression not just on the offender, but on everyone watching. These punishments took many forms, from flogging in village squares to full-scale executions designed to horrify and warn. One of the most common practices was to strip a disgraced knight of his weapons and armor in front of his peers. The symbolic destruction of his sword and removal of his spurs wasn't just practical, it was theatrical. The knight's status, once proudly displayed in battle, was torn away with force and ceremony, reducing him from elite warrior to humiliated outcast. Sometimes some cowards were dressed in ridiculous or humiliating clothing, made to wear their armor backward, or forced to carry broken weapons as they were paraded through crowded streets or encampments, heads bowed, to the sound of mockery. The goal was simple: make the shame unbearable. For common soldiers, the consequences could be even more brutal. If a man fled his post in the middle of a fight, he might be beaten on the spot by his comrades or executed in full view of the army. Hanging and beheading were used, but more gruesome methods weren't rare. Punishments like mutilation, cutting off ears, noses, or fingers, served as lifelong marks of disgrace. In some places, deserters had their faces branded or were tied to stakes outside the camp for days without food. The message wasn't subtle. Cowardice wouldn't be hidden, forgiven, or forgotten. And these weren't just battlefield responses. In cities, cowardly or dishonored men could be tied in stocks in public squares, where passersby were encouraged to spit, throw garbage, or yell insults. Others were tied to whipping posts where each lash echoed through the stone alleys. The punishment was never only about the individual, it was about setting an example, controlling morale, and maintaining a very fragile sense of order in a time where chaos was always near. In a medieval army, fear of the enemy was real, but fear of your own side could be worse. Number 3, religious belief strengthened discipline. A wave of new historical research and archaeological findings is shedding powerful new light on how deeply religious belief shaped military discipline in the Middle Ages, especially among knights and crusading forces, where faith wasn't just a private matter, it was central to how armies held together in times of crisis. Scholars now agree that one of the most overlooked aspects of medieval warfare was how armies used spiritual motivation as both shield and sword, not only to inspire bravery, but to shame or punish any trace of fear or retreat. Clergy, often embedded within military campaigns, delivered fiery sermons before battle, invoking divine judgment and eternal damnation for cowardice. Knights were told they fought not only for their lords but for God, and to break rank was to break with heaven itself. This wasn't just symbolic. Failure in battle could lead to exclusion from religious rites, burial outside consecrated ground, or even being branded a sinner in life and after death. In addition to preaching, entire military orders were created around faith. The Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights weren't just warriors, they were monks in armor, bound by vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity, with an unwavering duty to face the enemy without fear. These men trained not just with swords, but with scripture. Breaking their code meant excommunication and disgrace. Their discipline came from belief as much as from command structures. Meanwhile, the peace and truce of God movements, originally aimed at limiting violence among Christian communities, slowly transformed into tools for regulating the conduct of armies. Church councils could impose strict prohibitions on fighting during holy times, and violating those bans meant both moral and legal consequences. This forced armies to respect a higher authority than any general or king, ensuring that troops operated within a framework of divine order, not just martial law. Pilgrimage also played a crucial role. Crusaders didn't see themselves as mere fighters, they were holy travelers carrying out sacred tasks. Many swore vows at altars before departure, and turning back was considered an offense against their faith, not just their leaders. Even death in battle was redefined. To fall while fighting infidels was to die as a martyr, guaranteeing eternal life, which made many knights embrace suicidal bravery rather than face the shame of retreat. Through these intertwined systems of belief, ritual, and fear of divine punishment, medieval armies built a code of discipline far more powerful than fear alone. Faith didn't just guide them, it bound them. Number 4, peer pressure and brotherhood were powerful tools. A string of recent discoveries and academic insights paints a vivid picture of how medieval armies relied on bonds of brotherhood and collective identity to enforce discipline, showing that peer pressure often mattered more than commands. In Florence, new analysis of chivalric culture reveals that knights experienced intense pressure to conform. Any sign of weakness threatened not only personal honor but the reputation of the entire group, and the fear of letting down one's comrades often thrust a soldier forward when his heart ran away. Studies into medieval friendship networks highlight that bonds were not casual, they were formal alliances, public commitments linking individuals with shared obligations. Knights bound in brotherhood were expected to stand firm together, and breaking formation meant failing the group as much as oneself. Meanwhile, historians now argue that orders like the Templars functioned as extended brotherhoods rather than military units. Members pled loyalty to one another under spiritual vows, creating a network where courage was a social requirement enforced by both faith and pure expectation. Refusing to fight was not only disobedience, it risked social exile from a tightly knit community. A reassessment of ritual practices in military guilds shows that group meals, shared weapons rituals, and communal worship fostered unity. And any breach, such as a coward fleeing, would be noticed immediately by peers, often met with shaming or mediation before higher authority got involved. New archaeological reports from reenactment societies in the UK have added resonance. Living history groups replicating siege practices say cohesion depends on solidarity. These reenactors report that medieval formations fell apart quickly if one person stepped away, underscoring that the real medieval discipline relied on peer enforcement, shame, ridicule, or subtle coercion when someone flagged. Modern scholars also cite everyday chivalric manuals, which advised young squires to think not just of their personal valor, but of how cowardice reflected on their entire knighthood. A failure of individual courage equated with betrayal of the brotherhood. Additionally, updated research into Spanish Santa Hermandad emphasizes how local armed brotherhoods policed behavior in the field, acting as peer enforcement squads that would confront or discipline soldiers who shirked duty, even outside formal army structures. These groups relied on mutual accountability. Everyone watched everyone else, and standing firm became as much about preserving the group's order as obeying orders from above. A fresh reading of Irish military guilds, such as the Brotherhood of St. George, shows similar patterns. Small, tightly bonded contingents where loyalty was social glue, and participants subjected each other to informal peer discipline during campaigns. A recent monograph on medieval political friendship networks emphasizes that these loyalties were not peripheral, they formed the backbone of cohesion. Knights exchanged oaths, gifts, and pledges, binding themselves into alliances that demanded mutual support. To flee was to break that bond, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but in the eyes of trusted allies. 10 modern findings together show that medieval armies didn't just use punishment or fear, they relied heavily on peer pressure, shared identity, and social expectation. In that world, standing one for another meant more than duty, it meant belonging. Number 5, discipline came from the top. New historical